MSP customer deliverables with Performance Navigator. Let's go through the quick agenda here. We're going to talk about the MSP Performance Navigator perspective. So obviously this product is used by a lot of customers around the world to do performance analysis, problem determination, capacity planning, and so forth. But, from an MSP standpoint, they may have a little different perspective as to how they want to use this tool. So, a lot of that has to do with providing customer reports on some regular basis, right? Then we'll talk about kind of the summary of the deliverables, sort of what's available and in what formats and that kind of thing. And then we'll actually get into a little demo of, customizing, how do you set this up so that you can provide customized MSP reports for your customers. So, from a MSP perspective, and for that matter, for a lot of customers, period, what's unique about Performance Navigator is that collecting the historical data is free. And there is no overhead. That's usually the question we might get, but there is no overhead because we use collection services, which is built in IBM. We use Nmon for AIX Linux in BIOS. So it's either part of the operating system. In the case of Linux, it's open source Nmon, but so it's almost little or no overhead from a CPU and or from a disk space point of view. So, but that collecting that historical data is really what it's all about, right? By default, each of these operating systems basically don't do that, right? They leave it up to the customers to collect any kind of amount, any amount of history. But as I like to say, if there's no data, there's really no analysis, right? Regardless of whether it's capacity planning or problem determination, performance analysis, right? So it's really important to have this historical data, which is why we give it away free, right? So don't confuse collecting the data with analyzing the data, because we'll talk about that here shortly. Now, the interface to all of this data, regardless of what platform, is the Windows GUI. And from the Windows GUI, you actually have 3 deliverables that are free. Why do we do this, right? We do this we want to make sure, as you're collecting this free data, that you ensure the data is current. You want to in fact, historically, you should always see, if you're looking at a graph by date, you should always see yesterday's date. That's by default what should happen. Now, the 3 free deliverables are a daily health check. And by the way, that would be for yesterday. And that is one of the HTML outputs that's under Power Analytics. And you can actually save a JPEG or a CSV with your CPU by priority or your disk space utilization, right? So if a customer, all they want is look at their CPU and disk, you could actually provide that, free for the customer at a high level, right? Now, to do anything else, right, to create all the other deliverables, which we're going to talk about, other than daily health check, we're talking about, daily, weekly, monthly, summaries, enterprise reports, all of those kind of things. That does require a license, right? So most of the customer deliverables would require a license. And as I mentioned, the license goes on the PC side, not on the host side, right? Now, the fact that you have all this history, even though we're going to focus on the reporting side of things today, obviously the product can, because we have this history, we can actually do a better job of, I'm going to call it problem determination, because, we know the before picture, before the problem happened, what was going on, or performance analysis, right? Now that does require a temporary key code. So let's say, you didn't buy a license for X number of LPARs, but the data is being collected for free. Customer calls and they want to deep dive into it. You could certainly get a temporary key code for a fee, and you could have full access to all of the features and functions of Performance Navigator. If you don't have the data installed, so what kind of reports can we do, right? So you can certainly do graphs and reports, right? We've been doing that for years. You can save. And there's literally over 1,000 graphs and reports, most of which you're never going to do because those are really for problem determination or performance analysis. But, think of the high level CPU, memory, disks type of things. You can save those as a JPEG, Or see if a customer chooses they want to input this into an Excel spreadsheet, you could actually save the data if you want. We have several customers that do that. Product also generates reports that are spreadsheet-like reports that can be saved as CSVs, and then you can import those into an Excel spreadsheet if the customer wants a lot of detail, right? Or if you, the MSP, need to look at this detail to help answer a question, for example, so you could actually do that yourself. Now, what we're going to talk about mostly for customer deliverables is all generated under what we call Power Analytics. And everything under Power Analytics generates HTML. Now, there's a lot there. For each LPAR, for example, you can create a daily report, as we mentioned before, a daily health check. You can create a weekly report, a monthly summary. Now, the weekly and monthly summary, they're longer reports, but they also include trending information, which is important. I mean, a lot of customers want to know, am I growing or not growing, and so forth. So, and from an MSP standpoint, it's sort of helpful to know, what the whole frame is doing, right? Are your customers growing or not growing, that kind of stuff. So you can kind of look to see, if you're short of resources or this machine is going to last you a long time because of, the customer workload is changing a lot or dynamically, right? We also have customer enterprise hardware report and performance summary. So those daily, weekly, and summary reports tend to have all the trending information, tend to have more data like CPU and CPW and disk, and that may be what the customer wants or needs. Sometimes that's too much information. These enterprise reports tend to take that a step a little higher. And what we're looking at there is like one line per every LPAR. So you could see the CPU and memory and disk, it's focused on the hardware section. And by default, there are guidelines, and the cells are colored green, yellow, or red, depending on how close you're getting close to a guideline or over a guideline. So those are the enterprise reports. So those are, at a very high level, the kinds of things you can generate, right? Now, most of this is going to be, instead of just sending this HTML to a customer, which you certainly could do, the issue is that a lot of these HTMLs have hot links to them, and these hot links are JPEGs, right? So you just can't email the customer an HTML, right? If you were to do this manually, which we do often in our service work, we basically save it as a PDF and send it to them. Now, if you do that, obviously the hot links aren't going to work. But if as a automation and as a deliverable to a customer, you probably want those hot links to work, right? So you need to automate the production of these reports, and we do that through what's called a report set, which in detail won't be covered in this presentation, but certainly if anybody asks, we can certainly get into exactly how that is. It's pretty straightforward, right? But you can generate graphs or save the HTML to generate these reports, right? But on top of that, once these reports are generated, you really want to go customize a dashboard. And think of it, there's two dashboards. There's one for yourself, the MSP, which basically can see everything. In other words, you can see all of the reports you're generating for all your customers, right? So basically this is controlled by who has access to what directory, because all this stuff is going to get saved to some shared drive or some web server, and you can put controls over, access controls over who has access to a given directory, right? So the MSP would have access to this directory and like everything below it, right? A customer's dashboard would only have access to their dashboard, right? Their index, and you'll see how that works. So let me go through and show you sort of the demo of how this works, and maybe it'll be a little bit more clear. So some of y'all might be familiar. This is the client, and you can see over here that, as we mentioned before, if we can connect IBMI, AIX, Linux, BIOS, and we've color coded them by the operating system over here. I think the limit is this one client can handle up to 2,000 LPAR connections. So I don't know that we've ever hit a limit yet, to my knowledge. So you can see I probably have 500 or so connecting here, because people, again, send us data for, capacity planning and problem determination and that kind of thing, right? So everything the way you create or edit this dashboard, everything is customizable in these middle section here. And you can actually see what we're going to talk about here is the enterprise reporting dashboard. So this is what by default everybody sees. So actually the customer can generate their, a customer Performance Navigator can generate their own dashboard. So they're on-prem. They don't want, they want to send an easy link so that their CIO can see what's going on last month and so forth. So they could actually do a similar thing. Now, what they're doing here is you'll see a similar pattern for the MSPs, right? Branding. So what are we talking about branding? We're talking about the logo of the company, the colors of the company, that kind of thing, right? So give it a little personalization, so to speak. Then you would go through and select which systems you want them to be on. So let's say this is a customer. Let's say they have 3 LPARs and they want to do it on their 2 production LPARs, but not their dev partition. So they're just going to say, I want these 2 systems. And then you have to do a report selection. So let's say in our example, we're going to do a daily health check and a monthly report for each of these LPARs. So you would have to tell us, okay, these are the reports we're going to have to do for these systems. So you tell us which report, tell us which system. If they're in data centers, we could actually break that up. I did not do that with this demo, but that is an option. Probably not for customers, but more so for MSPs. If you got multiple data centers, you could divide these up by data center. Once you've configured all this, then you create the framework. So think of this as an overlay HTML that makes it real easy for MSPs internally, the technical staff, or customers to navigate all this data. And because if you looked inside the directory itself where all this is stored, you're going to see the HTML index, but you'll also see all the JPEGs and everything else that's hot linked. Well, that gets kind of messy. It's a lot right here. So this framework is sort of to mask off all that stuff and just give them direct access to really what they want, right? So this is the default what the customer's doing, right? Now, what we want to do is an MSP, though, by default, it's off. So we're going to go to Graph and Advanced, and you'll see this little option down here. It says Show MSP Options. So what we're is switch that on, and let me drag this down, and I'm going to close this. And I'm going to close PerfNav and start it back up again because we need to do that in order to get it to recognize that MSP option. So it is bringing Performance Navigator up. So by the way, while this is coming up here, the way MSPs would do this, you would install this on a Windows VM somewhere. And think of that as the VM that's going to be generating all these reports for all your customers. So it'll just sit there day after day, night after night, just generating reports and generating this frame, the framework, right? So you'll see that that's sort of how that's going to work, right? But now if you come over here and you go to Edit and Enterprise System Dashboard, now you'll see the MSP additions. So the extra step that MSPs are going to go through is add a customer. So you have the MSP itself, like I mentioned, you want to see everything. You want to see all your customers. But again, you want to create a directory, think of it that way, where a customer can only see, their stuff and not see anybody else's, right? So you're going to add a customer. So this is really a shortcut to, and I'm just going to click here to go to groups. And you'll see this MSP customer here. You click this box and you'll see that I've created 3 customers. So you create a customer, give it a name. I gave it Fortra. We got one called Super. And we got one called ABC. So the customer Fortra has 1 VM. Super's got 2 and ABC's got 2. So that's the first step. You create your customers and which LPARs are they going to create reports to when they go out and look at their whatever link they have to do, right? So that's the first step, right? So the next thing is we're going to come down here and then you'll see the MSP branding and logo. So what you want to do is have your logo, and they can be JPEGs or PNGs, And you certainly don't want to make it too big. So a small or a medium size is, because remember, this is going to be a logo on it at the top of most of the reports. So we're not, it's just an indication of, hey, this is my report, so forth. So you're going to create your logo, and then you're going to create the logo for your customers. In this case, I have 3 customers, so I'm going to get a logo for those customers, right? And just like the next step is just like the customers doing themselves, you're going to select which system. And in this case, I had 5, right? 1 for Fortra, 2 for Super, and 2 for ABC. So I would select the 5 LPARs, and I would also tell us what report. So in this case, I said we're going to do a daily summary and a monthly summary. So those are the 2 reports, and you could, if you wanted to, put those in different data centers. I did not do it for this example. But if you wanted to, you could certainly say frame A is in data center A and frame B and C are in data center B, right? And you would have separate that depending on who's managing those data centers or whatever. And then you click Create Framework, and that Create Framework takes all the logos, takes the system names, and creates this overlay that makes it real straightforward. And it's a nice, clean interface, for yourself and the customers, right? So that's sort of the high-level steps that you go through. And then I'm going to say, once you do that, then you can come over and say View and say Enterprise Reports. And this is the overlay. And you can see that I've saved this by default on my C drive. This is by default where it's going to go. But you can certainly, the idea would be this is going to be on a shared drive or a web server somewhere. Because you can tell us to save it anywhere you want. Now, in this case, this is the MSP. I just happened to choose the IBM's Power VS as an example. And I'm looking at their report. So I can see the 3 frames. There were 3 customers, right? And they happened to be on 3 different frames. So I can, and by the way, you could give these things aliases if you wanted to for that kind of man. And you can pick the color here. So you can change the logo. You can change the color of this heading. You can change the color of the buttons if you want. And you'll see some of that. So I clicked that one LPAR or that one frame, and sure enough, there's Flatiron. Remember, that was 1. And now I switched it, and now I see a daily health check. So there's the daily health check for that frame. Now, again, this is the MSP view, right? So I can see everything. So there is the monthly. You can see here's the trending information over here, right? So that's the nice thing about a monthly report is you get to see that. Now, if you come back over here and you want to go to the view the customer data, right? So let's go to Fortra. Now you'll see, because it's a customer view, you can see the logo changed and the colors changed. And this would be right here, this Fortra report index.html. That is the index that you would give your customers access to. So this is how you control what the customer sees versus, what you see. You could see everything, but the customer can only see what's in that directory, whatever it's the F drive, whatever directory stream, but this is going to be the back end of that. Now, ultimately, you're going to see the same thing, right? Except the customer seeing their logo versus the business partner or the MSP's logo, right? Now, if I want to go back to the customer view again, and let's go to Super. So there's an example of changing the logo. So this is an auto store, I believe. It's a Super. They got 2 frames. I'm going to go here, and again, we created a daily health check and a management and summary report. And you can see that that's the reports they have now. So you can see how we changed the logo for that customer. Now let's go back to the customer view. All customer view. If you go to ABC, and there's that health check, and there's now. You'll notice this still has the Fortra logo. When I created that report, I could have used the customer's logo as well. I just didn't do it for this example, but this could also have the customer logos on it as well, these reports. So you can go back to the all LPAR view. And again, here's the data center view. Now remember, I did not do that, but this is the message you would get. It said, hey, tells you go to edit and groups and create a data center and create a radio button. And it tells you how to go do that, right? But I didn't do it in this case. Now, here's an example of the enterprise reports you might want to see. I did not run the enterprise reports, but if you ran enterprise reports, this is where they would be. And they would be those one line per customer. So this is sort of a short video of how this would work.